I'm Justin Davis, and this is Drocamp's RC. Hey guys, welcome back to my RC channel. I'm Justin Davis, and I've done hundreds and hundreds of different reviews on different quads, FPV components, and various things related to the RC hobby. Now today I have something from Furibee here. This is an all-in-one flight controller, and it has pretty much everything you need here, including a VTX, to get your quad in the air and pretty much make it the most simplest build you've probably ever done. So this will be a great all-in-one flight controller for someone that wants to build a 5-inch race quad with minimal effort to get it in the air. And there's a few quirks about this flight controller, mainly concerning the way they mounted the gyro. And I've talked about this before on my channel. I offered a fix for it, and it's a very, very simple fix. Once you do that to eliminate the vibrations out of the gyro, this is an excellent flight controller. And I think what I like the most about this flight controller is the fact that it does have an onboard DVR recording 1080p straight to this little micro SD card slot here. You can put up to about a 32 gigabyte micro SD card on there. You want to choose something like a class 10 or better, and you'll get the best result from the video frames going back, being recorded down to the card. Now let's just go ahead and jump right into that fix, because this is going to be the most important thing if you decide to purchase this flight controller VTX ESC combo with the DVR here. You're going to need to know how to fix this and make it fly right. Other guys have been trying to fly it. Andy RC and others have been having real issues when the quad makes a hard turn. This gyro right here is responsible for keeping your quad level, and even in acro mode it relies on this. So whether you're in stabilized or acro mode, if you pull a hard turn to the right or left on the roll axis, a lot of times this gyro is going to move a little bit on the soft foam tape that they have put on here. This is way too soft for a mounting. You can see it moves really easily, so even if it moves a fraction of a millimeter, it's going to cause your quad to violently twitch. And when it comes back to level and stops that center of gravity move or adjustment, then the gyro is going to take back over and continue flying. But it can also lead to a crash if you're low to the ground. So a lot of times when I was testing this, first starting out on my X215 Pro S, I was pretty high up in the air, and those tumbles didn't really result in a crash. So I'm going to show you how to fix this. If you're interested to get this flight controller, this is going to make a world of difference, and it's going to make it fly on rails. Now I've removed these 4 top little plastic nuts off the top of these posts, and you also do get some extra size, taller and shorter standoffs inside this pack right here. And if you don't want this to be so tall, you can actually make this whole thing a lot shorter. It doesn't need to be so tall like they have it here, like they shipped it to me. So go ahead and take the DVR and VTX and put that over to the side. Now you're going to take your fingernail and just lightly pop this off of the flight controller. And the next thing you need to do, you see these 2 pieces of foam right here, get absolutely every bit of foam off of the gyro itself and off of the flight controller. Now I can use my fingernail. I wouldn't use any type of tool on here because you might actually scratch this PCB, and you don't want to do that. So just keep working it with your fingernail real lightly, and that foam will come right off. And then do the same thing to the gyro until you get even all the adhesive off there. It's actually stuck really lightly down, so you shouldn't have any problem removing it. Now once you have that removed, go ahead and get yourself some of this. If you're in the FPV hobby, you should definitely have this version of the Scotch tape 3M VHB. You can get this stuff over at Home Depot. Now the next thing you're going to do is take this, peel it back, and just cut yourself a little tab exactly to fit the gyro, and actually maybe just a little bit wider than the gyro itself, so you don't have one side of it sticking out off of this little bed that you're going to make for your gyro. So this just mounts it a little harder, and it actually keeps the gyro from tilting during your maneuvers when you do your hard rolls and turns to the left and right on your yaw axis also. So I'm going to take this, and I'm just going to stick this on the underside of the gyro, and then I'm going to mount it down to the flight controller. And now you can see I've got my VHB 3M sticky tape on the back of this gyro, and I'm just going to go ahead and stick it back exactly in the same spot where it was before. This is not going to hurt the flight controller or the gyro at all. just make sure you get it close to where it was before, and go ahead and press it down nice and tight with your thumb until you get all of the surfaces pressed down to the flight controller. Make sure it's nice and flat. Your ribbon cable is still going to stick out the side, and I'm going to talk about how to fix that as well to be a little more durable for your 5-inch setup here in a second. So that's looking pretty good right there, and that is pretty much going to fix any of the hard tilt or erratic gyro behavior on this particular flight controller. That's all there is to it right there. So also I want to note that when you stick it back on there, whatever you do, make sure that this little arrow is pointing forward along with the flight controller arrows as well, because this kind of dictates the direction of your flight controller where the front is. So this is actually going to be a side mount VBAC cable coming off the side of this flight controller. I thought this was the rear, but this is actually the right side of the flight controller. Now this flight controller can also run from a 3S battery to a 6S battery. I'm not sure, they advertise it 6S, but I'm not sure I would run 6S on this. I think safe-wise, I did run 5S on my Furibee X215 Pro S model, and it did pretty good. So you're probably okay to run it 4 to 5S. I think 6 might be pushing it. Now I'm just going to take the smaller and the shorter standoffs here and go ahead and put those on that top layer where my camera, DVR and Vtx are going to sit just above this, because I don't really need the super tall ones on there, and I can shorten this entire stack. Once I add my receiver on top, it'll just give me a few more millimeters of room in between the top of whatever 5-inch frame that I mount this to. So I'll just give you a sort of an idea of a mock-up of how close that will look when it's on there. I just have 2 of the standoffs there, but you can see this is going to make it a lot shorter. You can also do that for this bottom part too, and you can really reduce the entire height of this stack. And by the way, there's actually a few versions of this flight controller out there. There's also a smaller Furibee X4. This is the larger 5-inch version. It's going to have 30 by 30 mounting points. So you're mostly going to put this on a 5-inch race quad. You're not going to put this on anything smaller than that, unless it's like maybe like a 180 size or something that has a 30 by 30 mounting point. Now the Fort, the other one that I've shown on this channel before, it's like a miniature 20 by 20 version. So if you're looking for something like this to put on your Micro, this would sort of be a competitor to something like the Runcam Split. Pretty much the same concept, but with the rest of the bells and whistles in here with your flight controller, and F4 flight controller, and ESCs that can go up to, I would say, safely 5S. And also, you probably noticed this large ribbon cable they have right here. I think this might be like one of the first revisions of this Furibee Fort that they did for the 5-inch 30 millimeter size. I'm not understanding why GearBest would send me this one to show you guys, mainly because if you look on their site, I'm going to show you the link down below, it's completely different than what you see here. The newer one has sort of a full color Furibee logo on the top right here, and it's also silver up here with black and yellow, and the cable has been completely redesigned. So I'm not a big fan of this sort of ribbon cable they have going on here. The other one is covered in a nice fabric, and it's also about 3 or 4 times as narrow as this one is. So this one is going to have to be tucked back in this frame in behind the camera here, and I'll try to keep that nice and safe here, but that's about what it's going to look like once I put it on the quad. So not the greatest design in the world. I think that's a good idea that they decided to redesign this cable, but it is a replaceable cable. So if you had problems with it or you tore it, you just lift this pins right here up, and this cable just slides right out. No big deal there. Now you're looking at the top of this board a little closer now, and hopefully you guys are enjoying my 4K camera that I upgraded to, because I can really get in there and show you guys some of these boards super close up without losing any kind of autofocus. This camera really holds a nice macro shot, so hopefully you enjoy that upgrade on the channel. But right here, like I was telling you, we have this camera cable that connects right here, and over here you have your power and your reset button right there. If you want to change the Vtx power, you can do that on this. It goes from 50 milliwatt to 200 milliwatt. So it's probably likely set and default down to 50 milliwatt. So if you want to change the Vtx power on here, you're just going to hold this button down for about 10 seconds, and you'll see the LED light skip over to the next one. When you do see that happen, you've switched to a larger power mode. And back here is where your SD card goes in for your DVR recordings. And on the X215 Pro, I thought the way they had this placed on there was a little bit awkward to get to get your SD card in and out. So if you mount this on something other than the X215 Pro S frame, it's probably a good idea to make sure you have this somewhere where it's easily accessible. But it's definitely going to have to be in the back of the quad because this has to go forward. You can't really mount this to the side and bring this under. You might be able to, but you might also be compromising this cable. And let's just remove this and let's talk about this flight controller that's on here because it is one of my favorite flight controllers. This is the Omnibus F4 flight controller, and it's compatible with a variety of different receivers: DSM2, Futaba, S-Bus, and PPM. I think you can even run some old school PWM where you have an individual wire going to each channel, which is kind of nuts. So that's why we all use S-Bus these days, because it reduces about 8 different wires down to about 3. Same thing with DSM2 or DSM-X. It just really simplifies things a lot. And you also have 2 spots on here for running DSM2 or DSM-X or S-Bus or PPM. So now you're looking at the very top rail of this board, and over here on the right hand side is where you're going to have your PPM setup right there for PPM receivers. Most people don't use that these days. Most people are using something like S-Bus, and S-Bus is going to go right here. The very first one over here is not labeled, but it is a square, and I've talked about this before on my channel, that square is usually going to be a ground wire, the black wire coming from your receiver. The next one up is round, and that one's going to be your positive 5-volt connection there for the red wire. And the next one over, that SRC right there, that's going to be where your signal wire comes in from your receiver. It's usually white or yellow. And I'll just give you guys a little vertical view to make this a little bit easier, a little closer in here. Up from where S-Bus is, we have another ground port right there. We have UART 6, 5, NC, TLM, and 3-volt for hooking up your DSM2 or DSM-X receivers right there. Now you're looking at the right hand side of the flight controller right here, and we have a few different things over here. We have 6 different tabs here that you can solder things to. We've got a 5-volt here, the BB negative right here for your buzzer. You can hook up the LED, your RSSI port, and you have 2 ground spots down here, and those are square again, like I was showing you before. Now it's kind of oddly placed, but right next to the F4 chip, there is the boot button for flashing the firmware on this board. If you get in trouble and you need to reflash this, for some reason you can't connect to it, if you reflash it, it's going to reset all of your settings for all of your switches and everything on there. So you're going to have to go back in and set up your modes and all the things and the changes that you did inside the configurator and other spots inside Betaflight. So think about that if you do press the boot button and reflash it. If you need to, it is the Omnibus F4 firmware that you're going to flash back on this board. And normally they stick the boot button right next to the USB, but it looks like they didn't have a spot to because we have our signal wires coming up from the ESCs that go in right here to tell the flight controller what motor is what. Let's just go ahead and remove the flight controller off of this stack here, and I'll show you the bottom there. You have another micro SD card port right there, and that is going to be for your black box data. You can record all of your black box data from your motors, ESCs, all that good information and data can be saved right there. I'd probably use maybe an 8 gigabyte on that one. You really don't need anything bigger than something like a 4 to 8 gigabyte for black box data. And over here on the right hand side of this flight controller, check this out. This is a little tiny connection tab for your video transmitter antenna. So this is just going to come in here just like this and pop down onto the flight controller, and then you're going to run this wire wherever you want up out the top of your quad where your circular polarized antenna is going to mount to. So it already has a nut on there for securing it to your carbon frame, which is super nice. All the hardware is on there for you guys just to go ahead and tighten that down. And by the way, this is the same size nut on here as what goes on the top of your motor. So that's about a 3mm stem right there on this antenna connector. Okay, so now you're at the bottom of the stack, and this is probably a pretty major part of the stack. This is the 35 amp ESCs, which enable you to run safely up to 5S. And you notice that on the bottom, they only have the plastic screws here. You're gonna need to put another standoff, probably those short ones that I showed you earlier, underneath here to give yourself some separation between the bottom bottom of your carbon frame and this ESC. You never want any of your electronic components to touch any part of your carbon frame, because carbon conduct electricity and it will fry out your entire system. So make sure none of this is touching the carbon on your frame if you're new to building. Now these ESCs are also running DShot 600, which is awesome. If you're new to it, make sure you go to Google and type in BL Heli Suite. Go ahead and download that, install the drivers, restart your computer, and once you power up your battery on here and you plug in the USB cable to the flight controller here, then you're going to be able to go in here and update these BL Heli ESCs, reflash them. If you have a problem with a motor, you can go and use BL Heli Suite to check to see if one of your 4-in-1 ESCs went out. If you ever have a motor start twitching, go inside BL Heli and check it out to make sure that all these ESCs are still intact, because if you have a motor blowout or you have an ESC blowout, that's the easiest way to figure it out. If all 4 of your ESCs are still good, then it was probably the motor that went out. And honestly, this is a pretty easy setup right here. We've got the right-hand side of the board like this. If you look on the very bottom, let's just see if they have these labeled. They actually do. So let's just zoom in right there. You see this, it says M1 right next to that screw. That would be motor 1. Over here is motor 3. But if I flip this over, it's traditional to the way it looks in beta flight. So we'll have motor 1 here on these 3 tabs. We'll have motor 2, motor 3, and motor 4 up here. So that's the way you're going to solder that up if you're trying to solder this board up using this video. And just a tip, guys, put plenty of solder on these 2 tabs right here. Just go ahead and get it nice and full right here when you go to solder on your battery wires. Make sure you have positive here and negative here, and trim these back a little bit and pre-tin these first before you solder them down to this board. Also, wherever you decide to run your battery wires out underneath your quad, make sure you put a zip tie somewhere on this battery wire in between this and where these 2 are going to connect on, because once they rip off, it'll ruin your ESC if they do rip off. And it's also kind of cool that they gave us some kind of plastic braid to go around these battery wires and kind of tidy them up. And once you do that, once you solder it to here, you can solder on your XT60. Now also, guys, pay attention when you're putting your flight controller back on top of this. If you remove it, make sure you put it on the correct way, because this is going to be a battery VBAT situation where you have the wires run out the side of your quad and down and under. They're not going to go out the back. But what's nice about this configuration is that all of these motor wire tabs aren't hanging off the side of the quad, which I really like. The only downfall of this entire setup right here might be that this ribbon cable hangs out. I know that makes a lot of guys nervous. I fly 5-inch all the time, and honestly, I've never had a problem ripping up one of these or just severing it. I've really had pretty good luck with these cables. If you want to do a little bit of extra safeguard, this might be a little bit hardcore, but some of you guys are hardcore, so take a little bit of hot glue and add right around the top of this cable. Make sure you use low temperature hot glue so you don't melt this cable. The last thing you want to do is damage this cable in any way, or you can use something that you can remove later. And probably the best suggestion for this would be some type of liquid tape. Liquid tape will just completely cover that up for you and keep it away from any kind of little branches or leaves or anything that might tear it up if you fly through the trees and crash. So that's probably my best recommendation, would be some liquid tape over top of this cable, because you can always peel it off later. Okay, so now I've got the entire stack and the camera on the scale, and it looks like the total weight is 50.9 grams. Now the entire height of this stack, if you want to trim these back a little bit, you can. This top post right here, we're going to be looking at a total height of, and we're going to just take into consideration that you might have a few more millimeters on the bottom. And let's just go ahead and try to simulate this here. It's probably going to be likely somewhere around 33 millimeters tall with that bottom standoff on there. Now you can shrink this down a whole lot if you use the shorter posts on here. You don't need all this space here, so go on Amazon and get yourself one of those boxes of standoffs. Those plastic standoffs are pretty cheap, and you'll have plenty of them for later. So now I have the latest Betaflight 3.2 on here, and it also has Betaflight OSD, which is thumbs up from me for that. So if I was going to rate this one, let's go ahead and give it a rating so I can give it just a true and honest review. I think this is a pretty okay first revision. I think this is going to get a lot better as the year goes on. 2018 is going to see a lot of these AIOs for 5-inch, and I think a lot of them are going to start to squeeze down to even smaller 20 by 20 stacks on 5-inch racers. We've already seen people doing it. It works. We have some 40 amp ESCs coming out from HGLRC as well. So in combination with a VTX stack and everything, these are getting to be super popular, and they're making building a lot easier for people. So it's not as scary as it was like 2 to 3 years ago. This is way, way easier and a lot less soldering. So you have it easy these days, guys. It supports all different receivers and combination types for your radios, and it has a pretty decent camera on here too, with a 1080p DVR recorder to an SD card, which is kind of amazing. That's pretty cool. So if you have any questions about this flight controller, or you have some troubles about where to put things, please do ask in the comments below, because you guys can share information with each other. I'll try to get back to you myself if I can, and answer any questions you might have about this particular flight controller. But as always, guys, thanks again for watching my channel. Please do subscribe, because you guys are what counts on my channel, and I appreciate you guys watching. So thanks again from me and my family here at Drone Camps. I appreciate you participating on the channel. Thank you so much. Guys, I'm Justin Davis, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care now. Bye-bye.